So from here, we are going to do a land acknowledgement, Randy and I. It's really important that we know not only who we are, but where we are as we move on to what we want to do next and who we want to be. So Randy, you want to kick it off? Randy is the executive director of the Portland Parks Foundation.
Hi, everyone. Please consider reading along, even out loud. The Portland metro area rests on the traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes that made their homes along the Columbia River, creating the communities and summer encampments to harvest and use the plentiful natural resources of this area.
We also want to recognize that Portland today is a community of many diverse Native peoples who continue to live and work here in the present. We respectfully acknowledge and honor all Indigenous communities, past, present, future, and are grateful for their ongoing and vibrant presence. And we also want to note the knowledge that they hold and the knowledge that they have held of land and the degree to which that we want to start to listen to that.
You know, there's about 380 tribes represented in the Portland area. It's the 9th largest urban Indian population in the country. So it's kind of amazing little nugget that we have here. And you know, as we dust ourselves off from these awful fires that we've had and the smoke that engulfed huge swaths of our region, I think it's kind of worth noting that the indigenous communities of the Willamette Valley lived with fire too, and for many centuries before we did. They came to understand its renewing powers and living in partnership with the land. And I kind of hope that together we can find ways of recognizing and working with fire and other natural events that are going to start shaping our region even more. So thanks.
Absolutely.
You know, there's been a long and a vibrant interface between the region's indigenous artists and Portland's wider contemporary art scene. And our next guest, Ed Edmo, and I first met in the early 90s when I was writing about those artists. You know, Ed seemed to be everywhere, from museum openings to art shows in old warehouses. But the funny thing is, since those days, I lost my hair and turned gray and changed jobs a bunch of times. And Ed kind of looks exactly the same, and he's still telling stories.
Maybe it's a testament to the health of the storytelling life, being a Shoshone Bannock tribal member, a traditional storyteller. Ed lives in Gresham with his extended family, and he will be telling the Colville legend, how Coyote made the Columbia River. Ed?
I'm Ed Edmo. I'm Shoshone Bannock Nez Perce Yakima, raised about 9 to 5 miles east here at a place called Solano Falls. When the cold winter wind would blow down the Columbia Gorge from eastern Oregon, I would cover with many quilts made by loving hands, by mom, aunties, and grandma. It'd be the crackle in the fire in the wood stove. My father would tell me stories. I thought I was getting stories. I didn't realize I'd give my culture and it down from generation to generation. Thank you for reminding me that I have a job to do called storytelling. A long time ago, there was no Columbia River. Did you know that? The Cascade Mountains are, there's a great big lake. If you believe science, they talk about the Missoula flood where glacier melted 3.5 million years ago, forming the rivers and lakes in the Northwest. But that's science. Want to know what this Indians say? Coyote took a big stick to the top of the mountains and dug and sang a powerful song. Everyone gets your stick up. Help me say it. Get your stick up, everyone. And I see your stick. Get your stick up, everyone. Coyote take a big stick to the top of the mountain and dug and sang a powerful song. Everyone. Take a big stick to the top of the mountain and dug and sang a powerful song. carried big stick to the top mountain and dug and sang a powerful song. Carried a big stick to the top mountain and dug and sang a powerful song. Carried a big stick to the top mountain and dug and sang a powerful song. Carried a big stick to the top mountain and dug and sang a powerful song. And the water broke through, forming what we call Inchuana. Of Indians call the Columbia River, means the big rivers. Columbia River, big river, right? Animal people moved on to the riverbanks to be closer to the water. Old Coyote was part of himself. He made Inchuana. He walked up and down the banks of Inchuana. Saw the animal people didn't have much to eat. Kind of walked clear to the ocean. He saw many salmon swimming. Used his power. Told the salmon to swim upstream. That's what Coyote made Inchuana. That's why the salmon swim upstream. That's a Caldwell legend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed,
Yeah.
sharing that story, make us feel a little closer to this region and all the different spirits that inhabit it.
Yeah, yeah. I think I'm going to be saying, and they dug and they sang and repeating that motion all day. It was really beautiful. It was gorgeous. So next, we will get a chance to talk with Adina Long, the director of Portland Parks and Recreation. Adina Long came to PP&R in 2019 after a 20-year career with the New York City Parks Department. There she had a very interesting journey. She worked her way up from park ranger to deputy commissioner, doing every job from shoveling elephant poop to being the department's principal strategic planner to overseeing parks emergency operations during Hurricane Sandy. No small feat here. She also earned a Master of Science in Nonprofit Management at the New School. And on a break from the Parks Department, directed a nonprofit with a 100-person board of directors. Okay, Adina can get it done. She lives in Southwest with her husband, and they have a new 9-month-old German Shepherd puppy, Selena. All right, Adina, we're looking forward to chatting with you today.
Thank you, Jordan. And much gratitude to Randy, Jessica, the Summit Steering Committee, and the Portland Parks Foundation Board for bringing us together and making this wonderful event possible. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our incredible staff who care for more than 11,000 acres of parks in Portland, including 154 developed parks, nearly 8,000 natural areas, and of course, 1.2 million trees, 12 community centers, and 12 indoor and outdoor pools. Just, to name a few. And I want to thank all of our wonderful partners and allies for your ongoing commitment to supporting Portland Parks and Recreation and for joining us today. Portland has one of the very best parks and recreation systems in the world, and it's made possible by a long history of community support. Your volunteer time, whether you're pruning, planting, pulling weeds, picking up litter, leading tours, offering classes and programs in our parks and community centers, you build awareness of park issues through advocacy, you fundraise to fill service gaps and address critical repairs across our parks and recreation system. And of course, you serve on advisory boards and commissions in support of the Bureau's work. So time and time again, you stand up for our parks, and your support has made a huge difference. So I just wanted to say that out of the gate, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Amazing. There's so many collective forces that are working together. I'm really excited, Adina. I get a few minutes to ask you some great questions so we can really get a great connection with all the friends and allies that are here and PP&R. Before we start out with the very, very difficult questions, just wanted to ask a few, softball, easy questions to get to know you better. So, favorite color?
To wear gray, to look at teal.
Most of the time I'll get designers that say favorite color, my favorite color, it changes every day. So I like that you said wear, versus to look at. That's a beautiful distinction. All right, let's see here. Trees or flowers?
Trees.
Why?
They give life.
That's really beautiful. And our last question is, who's your favorite dog?
Dog.
Yeah, dog.
Well, I'd like to say it's Selena, my new puppy, but she pooped on the floor yesterday, so I don't know. Right now, Selena, but close second is Puppy, who was my childhood dog. And yes, her name was Puppy because we thought we would never keep her, so we just called her the Puppy. And she spent her entire life with us.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you for indulging my silliness. It's always good to get to know a bit about people. So let's get started here. You know, this year has been a year of a tremendous amount of pivots, dealing with structural deficits, the unfortunate passing of Commissioner Nick Fish, COVID, all of the demonstrations and uprisings, and also the fires. And so what strengths and weaknesses have these pivots revealed in PP&R?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of start from the beginning because it has been a intense year and a half for sure. And a lot's happened in particular since last November when Commissioner Fish and I spoke to City Council about our structural deficit and how we might create financial stability for our park system. And you're right, Nick's passing was a terrible blow for all of us. I joke that he may have been one of the main reasons why I came for this job, because he too was a New Yorker and we had a instant connection when I met with him. Nick loved parks and he believed in our work to ensure a sustainable future for the Bureau. Since his passing, we've continued to work on that vision, and we started by exploring alternative funding opportunities. We organized to implement a really painful and difficult budget. And as of March 1st of this year, right before COVID hit, we were on track for a balanced budget, which was pretty amazing given the reductions that we had to take. Then COVID hit and changed everything. I think the challenges and pivots of the past 6 months have revealed how critical a solid parks and recreation system is to a livability in our city. Our tagline, Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland, really says it all. But the service gaps that we've identified, they're very real, and COVID-19 further highlighted how our system resources are not equitable across the city. So you asked about strengths and weaknesses. I'm going to be kind of tagging back and forth because, you know, I don't want to just talk about the bad. As you know, and everyone on this meeting knows, our parks and natural areas and recreation facilities have always been critical resources for the community. And the challenges that we've faced the past 6 months, and really, I think we're entering 7 months, so you know, the time is flying and yet moving so slowly all at once. It's really shown how critical they are to the health and well-being of the community. Throughout the pandemic, Portlanders have flocked to our parks, trails, and natural areas, more so than ever before. I like to say that they've been really well loved over the last 7 months or so. And you know, the physical and mental health benefits of being outdoors is, you know, in nature are really well documented, but COVID-19 really underscored the value of the parks in the community during the pandemic. Whether you were using them for respite or exercise or just to connect to one another in a physically distanced way, of course. And then, as you mentioned, during the wildfires across the state, when smoke filled the air and we were all trapped inside, there was nothing more that we missed than being outdoors. So it was just another reminder of how important they are to us and for our everyday livability in the city. I think we've also seen how resilient Portland Parks and Recreation is as an organization and how committed our staff is to the community. The pandemic has affected every area of our operations, programs, facilities, our ability to earn revenue, and of course our staff. And despite all of these impacts, the Bureau continued to show up to the community in really significant ways. Earlier, I mentioned the Bureau's structural deficit. PP&R's dependence on fees created a really vulnerable funding model to provide recreation services. And again, COVID-19 highlighted that vulnerability. I'm not sure if anyone knows, but we actually have to earn 40% of our $35 million recreation budget. So that means PP&R, depends on fees from classes and instruction and summer camps and so on, in order for us to provide recreation services to the community. And when COVID hit in March, in order to diminish the spread of the disease, we closed all of those assets that would provide us an opportunity to earn revenue. And these closures made it impossible to earn the fees needed to fund recreation programs post-COVID as well. So it's a long-lasting impact that we're dealing with right now. I often joke that parkies are scrappy. We are that, but we're also resourceful and adaptive and empathetic. For example, COVID-19 made hunger relief our community's most critical need. So we worked with partners and focused our resources and capacity to provide food to Portlanders through our programs. We also converted community centers into temporary shelters for folks who were experiencing houselessness. And we opened over 50 restrooms for 24-hour-a-day use and added hand washing assets so that people could make sure that they continued with their personal hygiene. Right. And also during the wildlife response, we partnered with fire and rescue, and we continue to. And we also worked with Street Roots, and we evacuated dozens of campers from Forest Park and offered them shelter at one of our community centers. So beyond the changes brought by COVID-19 and the devastating wildfires in our state, you mentioned we are experiencing a historic racial justice reckoning. And our community, like so many across the country and the world, have been out demonstrating their anger and their sadness and their fear and their frustration by coming together and protesting police brutality and demanding racial justice. Many of these gatherings have started and ended in public parks. So we've played a critical platform for people to feel safe, to come together and connect and express themselves. Even though that's a challenging role to play, right? Because we don't get to say what that First Amendment expression looks like, but we serve as that platform, and it's a very important role for us to play. So I'd say over the past 6 or 7 months, we've needed parks and our natural areas and our trees more than ever to keep our community safe and healthy and connected. The only other thing that I would say in terms of like weaknesses and strengths is that the challenges also over the last 6 months have really highlighted the service gaps and inequities in our system. Not everyone in Portland has the same access to parks. Not everyone in Portland can afford our programs. These gaps are unfair, and they reveal how city resources are distributed not for the benefit of all, but for the benefit of some. The positive impacts of our parks, which are many, are not enjoyed by all Portlanders, and frankly, this is something that we must acknowledge and change.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad that you gave such a deep sense of place with the parks. I had not thought about it, but it's glaringly true that the parks have been critical to protests. And I was actually talking to a friend of mine who lives in Portland, and she was just saying, yeah, we love, not only do we love the parks, she said we actually love PP&R, we love the Portland Parks Foundation, because they really have been helpful to the people. It's incredible that we don't always think about how critical these things are until things like COVID-19 or protests show us. And let's just segue into talking about equity. I want to hear about PP&R's 5-year equity plan, and how it is concluding this year. How will the next equity plan take shape, and what will be the difference from the previous plan, and how will you move forward?
Thank you. So yeah, we are sunsetting the 5-year equity plan. We recently hired, I would say in the last 2 months, our second equity manager, Kenya Williams, and he worked for Parks previously, so and also for the equity inclusion team. So he actually was one of the authors of the plan. So we're especially thrilled to have him back. He started to analyze the plan to identify areas where we may not have made as much progress as we would have liked to. We've also recognized some weaknesses to the technique and the process of the plan, in that it was some of the indicators were not as measurable as they ought to be, so they were less helpful in looking at where we are now. Of course, it's like lessons learned, but so we've been going through that. We've produced and presented to the Parks Board actually a racial equity plan progress update. I anticipate that instead of having a 5-year racial equity plan, while we will have a guiding document and do a lot of community engagement around what our future equity, racial justice, diversity, and inclusion work should look like, I anticipate that it will not have a 5-year shelf life, because quite frankly, things are changing and moving too quickly. So it really needs to be a document that has an opportunity to evolve with how trends are changing and how the Bureau is changing. And I'll just add also that a racial equity plan for us is very different than some of the other bureaus in the city of Portland, because we are so public facing. Many of the racial equity plan and a lot of the work that the bureaus do around equity is about cultural and organizational culture, and less about, a little bit about service provision, but nowhere to the sort of, to the extent that Parks is. So it's very complex because there's work to be done internally and externally, and dare I say, probably just as much. So we will have another plan. It will likely not be for a 5-year duration, and there will be a lot of community engagement internally and externally to sort of inform what that looks like.
That's beautiful, and I think if I'm hearing you correctly, it's really powerful to see that the plan becomes a guiding document that I'm hearing can update and change and be flexible as you get more information, as you learn and as you grow. And that's I think a positive structural change.
Yeah, we think so too. And I think that is sort of the general trend for long-term planning these days. You very rarely see a 5-year strategic plan. For instance, Portland Parks and Recreation had a 20-year vision, and we looked through that vision, and it was it didn't even take into account bicycle riding as a recreation, right? Like that's how sort of like that's how you lose excuse me, brain fart. That's how you lose the relevance, right, of your planning when you're looking 20 years into the future. You really don't know. I mean, we might be on hovercrafts by then. Who knows?
That's right. That's right. I'm ready for my hovercraft. To round it out, this is the Friends and Allies Summit, and what we really want to know is how can friends and partner groups help individually and as a whole?
Okay. First and most importantly, please keep showing up. I think that's the most important thing. Seriously though, we are so lucky to live in a city where our parks friends and partners are committed to protecting and growing our system. I don't think we'd have the system we have today without the support of our wide network of allies. And like I mentioned in the beginning of my remarks, they really do many different things to support Parks and Recreation. So it's a very diverse array of networks of allies and friends, and we're very grateful to them. But I really can't stress the importance of alignment enough. Friends and partners can help most by making sure that their contributions of self, donation, volunteer efforts are coordinated with us, and what is critically needed in the system. So that would be both in terms of repairs and addressing service gaps and other program provision. So yeah, I think that's the most important thing, is just the alignment, you know, and I recognize that that we, Portland Parks and Recreation, have not had the capacity or the bandwidth to support friends and partners the way that we would like to, and the way that they need to be supported. But I'm hopeful that in the future we will be in a position where we can work closer and more regularly, so that we can be a little bit more strategic in how we're leveraging each other's resources.
That's really powerful. Well, thank you so much, Adina, for coming here and speaking and being a part of this process. It was really great to hear all of your insights and get an understanding of what's going on at PP&R.
Thank you, and thank you so much for emceeing.
All right.
I'll be here for the duration, but I'm going to put myself on mute now.
Okay. All right. It's so amazing to get to see all of the different pieces of the puzzle coming together and working together for the greater good of parks and ultimately people. And what's really powerful for the people is getting a chance to enjoy live performances. And that's what we have up next. You will get a chance to meet the Tongan Women's Association of Oregon as they perform for us today. And they tell us a little bit about themselves. So please go ahead with your introduction and your performance.
Malalele and welcome and good afternoon. My name is Mele Kamapalu, and I am the president of the Tongan Women's Association of Oregon, and previously the 2017 Madison Rose Festival Princess Ambassador of Portland. I also attend Portland State University. Within our Tongan culture and history, our stories have been passed down through orally and through dance for generations. Today, the Tongan Women's Association of Oregon will dance for you today. We will present a cultural dance performance featuring community members Tupo and Hata Fononga, Supeli Tawelangi, called the Tau'olunga, to the song named Se o Papine. The song was written by our beloved Queen Salote Tupo III. It was one of the many songs celebrating the beauty of our proud island, the Kingdom of Tonga. Se refers to the flowers women wear behind their ears throughout Polynesia. The brilliant and colorful flowers show the warmth, respect, and peace they share with our families, the kainga, and people of the community. So this song celebrates the many flowers women use when they dance for special occasions. Our community loved to use Portland parks for family and church gatherings. When we first settled here in the 1970s, we didn't know how to register for permits or the process of doing so, nor do we have the money to pay for fees, in turn, overwhelming our community. As we grew as a community throughout the years, Portland Parks and Recreation helped us register sites and reserve community centers. In 2017, we debuted the first and only Tonga Day in the nation to celebrate our heritage and culture. We thank Portland Parks and Recreation for the continuous support and sponsorship, as well as offering summer employment opportunities for our youth. Our growing relationship has enabled us to celebrate our annual Tonga Day event. We acknowledge the unprecedented times we are living in because of COVID-19. With respect and condolences to the families and community members across the world affected by the pandemic, we dedicate this dance to you, and we thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. It's always wonderful getting a chance to see movement and different forms of movement. Speaking of movement, move your shoulders, move your neck. Don't forget to stretch if you need to. We've got a great presentation coming up. Randy Graggs is going to help us understand a little bit more about the parks levy. And I can't wait to learn more about it, especially highlighting, you know, what the parks have done for us during these critical times. The people need the parks, and we and the parks need us too. So Randy, you ready to get started?
You betcha. Before we put up the slide deck, Jessica, let me just open with a few remarks. I think it's really easy, you know, all of us get, you know, focused on our sort of individual piece of the park system to forget that there's this huge system. You know, Adina talked about, you know, 11,000 acres. There's over 470 facilities, 10 swimming pools, for instance, world-class gardens, places for art classes, daycare, summer camps, nature education, and of course, the actual parks with tennis and futsal and basketball and baseball and soccer fields. There's 253 athletic user groups, leagues, and teams who logged in 190,000 hours of time in parks facilities last year. And as we saw with the Tongan folks, in a normal summer, PP&R puts on free movies and concerts and all kinds of cultural events for families in parks, from jazz concerts in Washington Park to the Tongan Dance Festival to Finding Nemo dubbed in Navajo at Cully Park. And then lest we forget, PP&R performs some essential services during the summer for providing free lunches to kids who are enrolled in lunch programs, but in the summer would otherwise potentially go hungry. A normal summer, they provide about 90,000 lunches. This summer, they provided 500,000. You have to remember that PP&R's parks rangers are on the front line contact with people living outside. And then of course, there's the nature piece of it, about 8,000 acres of natural areas and watersheds and the 1.2 million trees. If I can get the deck now, Jessica. So we all love our parks and recreation system, but now parks really needs our help. So we hope that you'll vote. First, vote, please vote. We hope that you'll consider voting yes on Measure 26213. Next slide. And this is a critical moment. I've been around Portland for 30 years now, and I can't think of a moment quite like this for our park system. So next slide. Now, as Adina talked about, there is this structural operating gap, and Commissioner Fish assembled a task force to look at this, to trying to solve it. And we looked at what the system would look like in 15 years. And if the funding, if basically historic general funding stayed the same and fees more or less stayed the same, except for increases in inflation, we would still see about a 16% growth in expenses over 5% projected growth in revenues. And that's part of that's the aging system. It's a 100-plus-year-old system. And then there's just the cost of personnel. As any of us who are employers know, it's getting more expensive. You have to one, pay a living wage in a place that is getting more expensive to live in, and then also healthcare. So these are very real things that over time, simply the way we've been funding parks is not going to work. What we discovered on the task force is that basically to maintain our system as we know it would require a 50% increase in funding over the 15 years. So that's a big number, and we were hard at work in trying to figure out what the best way to solve that problem was. And Commissioner Fish was a very methodical step-by-step person, but he passed away. And then COVID hit. Next slide. And suddenly the fees that normally pay 40% of the recreation budget and 27% of the overall budget were not being collected. And that blew a $16 million hole in Parks budget for the fiscal year. Next slide. So this is really about the future. This is a pivotal turning point in the history of our park system. Next slide, please. So the levy is 80 cents per thousand in assessed value. So that's different than market value. So if you look at your tax return, your property tax bill, look at the assessed value, and you can do the math. For an average Portlander, that's about $13 a month. And that's not chump change, particularly for folks who are on a fixed income. But look at it another way, it's 3 lattes per month. So it's not a wealth tax. It's spread evenly amongst everybody. And the options, it was one of the options we were looking at on the task force, and it was one of the least regressive. And so it was also the easiest one to move forward to really solve this big problem. So PP&R and Portland City Council opted to refer it, and it'll be on the ballot November 3rd. Next slide. Here's what it'll buy. It'll restart recreation programming, and it'll end the reliance on user fees to deliver that programming. And it'll make equity and affordability the primary goals. So it will support all the classes and senior programs and youth programs and educational education. It'll keep the doors open on Multnomah Arts Center and the Community Music Center and Interstate Firehouse. And it'll fund the operations of a North Portland pool, whether that's Columbia Pool, as long as it lasts, and then ultimately the new pool that's been in the planning stages. Next slide. It's going to protect the 8,000 acres of natural areas and care for the 1.2 million trees on parks land. It'll also fund the planting of more trees in parkland to combat the urban heat island effect, and particularly focused on areas in East Portland that have a tree deficit. Next slide. And it'll boost maintenance, about 2/3 of the levy. It's going to produce, I think I failed to mention, it's about $48 million a year for each year for 5 years. It will also, about 2/3 of that will go to maintenance. And over the last 10 years, the maintenance staff has actually been cut by 11%. And that's while the city has grown 13%, and we've added at least 5 new parks facilities that I can think of. And so this will reverse this long-term decline and make sure that our parks are maintained well. Next slide. It'll improve access, as I said before. It'll reduce the reliance on fees, so it'll really center equity at this concept. You know, essentially, the community centers kind of operate as little businesses, and they have to be really mindful of how many fees they're taking in order to continue to operate. And it's really not a way that we can really walk our talk about equity. It really leaves a lot of people out. And with this levy, we'll be able to essentially make the first question is, who do we want to have access? And then we can have sliding scale and other means to also add to the budgets. But the first question will really be, who gets access? And it'll assure culturally specific programs, popular programs such as Stand With Refugees and Immigrants, the Portland World Soccer Tournament, and Summer Free-for-All continue. I think we all missed Summer Free-for-All this year. Next slide. And then there's the jobs question. When the COVID hit, essentially 1,700 people were either laid off or not hired. Portland Parks and Recreation is the largest summer employer of youth in the city. And this is a big chunk, and we're heading into a really rough economy. And these jobs are really important. And they're also, especially the seasonal jobs are like the first rung on the ladder for, a lot of kids to, get some experience, get something on their resume, learn good work habits, and it's a path to better jobs in the future. Next slide. So if you're interested in getting involved, our website is portlandersforparks.org. Next slide, please. And I want to share with you, because it's easy to think that Portlanders always pass these measures. This is a little look at our polling that we did. So there's some public polling that was done that showed 28%, the dark green is 28%, I'm gonna vote for this. The 27% is, I think I will. And if we provide them more information about the crisis and what this levy will do, the I'm gonna vote for this moves up to 39%, and then 25% are still sort of in I need to be convinced, phase. And that's what this campaign is about. So we have to build a really strong and broad coalition, and we have to have really consistent messaging. And we really want to have a decisive win so we can set parks up for future wins. Next slide. We're kind of the big tent in terms of the money measures. We've got a really, broad coalition of endorsements from frontline community groups like Verde and Apano and Latino Network to Labor. Labor is a big supporter of this measure, to the various sports organizations and community organizations, and then the environmental community is coming out big time for this. Oregon League of Conservation Voters, Thousand Friends, Audubon Society. Next slide. And then we also have the endorsement of the Portland Business Alliance and the home builders of metropolitan Portland. Business is really behind this, and they aren't behind a lot of the other measures. Next slide. But we need our friends and allies. This is who's endorsed so far. And it's, frankly, you guys got to turn out for this. We really need your help. It's been really tough to raise money for this campaign. There's a lot of things calling out for people's money, from the presidential race to the other measures on the ballot. It's uncertain economic times. The levy was invented fairly quickly to solve this crisis. So it's been a challenge. And so we really have to have a good ground game, and that's where you guys are incredibly important. So I really hope that you'll turn out to endorse. And then there's other ways you can get involved. Next slide. So money, we need money. And it's easy to kind of think about this stuff abstractly. There's a lot of stuff hollering at your, for your money in the campaign right now. But I want to tell you how a campaign actually works, what it buys. $50 buys 8,000 views of our campaign message on Facebook and Instagram. $250, 20,000 search ad impressions. We can't go door to door like we used to in campaigns, so it's really important to target social media. $1,000 buys phone bank dials to 18,000 voters. We know the voters that we have to reach: under 30, people of color, women Democratic voters. We know exactly who we have to reach, but we have to actually get to them. Next slide. So there's lots of ways for you all to get involved, and I hope you will. You can sign up and keep updated on our website. You can volunteer, sign up as a volunteer, do some phone banking and some text banking. Please endorse us, like I said. Pledge to vote yes. And then I want to talk about one last way to get involved that would be really great. Next slide. You can have a house party. So we just did one literally last night with Aaron Zolikoff, and it was a blast. We had some guest speakers, and it's just a Zoom party. It's like half an hour, 45 minutes. One of us from the campaign will come and talk about the levy. We had raffle items. It was just a way of getting people together. We raised some money, not insignificant amount of money at this. Mostly though, it just builds the sense of support. People vote with their friends. And so pushing this out on your social media networks, personal and organizational, is going to be highly important to passing this levy. So I hope you'll consider that. We have an easy kit. We have a great campaign worker named Maddie, who will help you out, walk you through anything you need to have, and we just really want to get you involved. Part of the reason we wanted to do, this summit was conceived way before we knew about the levy. But one of the things that we really wanted to do at the foundation is to build a stronger coalition of park supporters, because we knew that there's going to be necessity for funding measures and really hanging together. And so it's coincidental that I'm here pitching this. We've never dreamed when we first thought of the levy that first thought of the summit that we would be pitching a levy. But here I am, and I hope you'll all get involved. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, Randy, thank you so much for giving us another part of the story in terms of the levy. I think it's really clear from today and from everything that's happened over the past several months and years that people need the parks and the parks need us. We have 2 questions so far. We'll start with those. And if anyone else has a question, please just place it in the chat box and we'll answer it. The first is from Marita. She asks, will the sustainable futures planning continue with or without the levy passing?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, the levy's, it's 5 years. And it buys us some time to be more methodical in the way that we first hoped to be. There's been a lot of transition, and we need to get a new parks commissioner. Amanda Fritz has stepped in to oversee the bureau until the end of her term, and we'll have a new parks commissioner coming in next year. And for sure, if the levy doesn't pass, there's going to have to be a lot of rethinking. But even if it does, 5 years is not that long, and there are other issues. There's a backlog of capital maintenance needs, and likely some form of a bond in the future. And so but we want to look at this comprehensively. There's a lot of people who are interested in a parks district, and that's a complicated thing. It requires going to state legislature for that, likely. So this sustainable future will continue to go on.
Thank you, Randy. All right, we have another question from Henry. Henry asks, what is the current PP&R annual budget, and will the levy augment that budget or be reduced from the general fund?
Well, that's a good question, Henry. It's about the parks budget is about 94 million now, and as we discovered in the Sustainable Future study, to maintain existing assets would require about a 50% increase in funding. The levy gets us partway there. It backfills the hit from Corona and does a lot of other things. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Second part of the question is
general fund. General fund. Yeah. Well, Mayor Ted Wheeler has pledged that there will not be a reduction from the general fund if the levy passes. I have to be honest. One city council can't encumber the next one. So if we have a different mayor, different council, that could change. But what we're trying to do through events like this is build a strong coalition to make sure that we hold the council accountable, because we're voting for this money to increase maintenance. We're voting to center equity and recreation. We are not voting to backfill the general fund. And that is up to us to make sure that doesn't happen with future councils.
all right. You answered the next question that we got within that one. I'll ask a question. What are some of the other positive outcomes of having a house party outside of gathering?
Well, you get to see your friends, and especially as the weather's starting to turn, it's harder to do that outdoors. I wish we could be doing these in person. They would be, so much more fun. But the main thing I think is getting your friends involved in this and helping them, recognize that this is an important, thing. I know a lot of my friends had no idea about this crisis, and they're in now. They recognize that there's a problem, and it's easy to take parks for granted. The weirdness of COVID, it's like, okay, summer free for all went away. Well, a lot of things went away, but what we have to recognize is without this levy, things like that aren't necessarily going to come back. Basically, for instance, money collected from fees this year goes to hire employees for next year. And one of the reasons, I'll be honest with you, when there was first serious talk about a November levy, I thought, you know, PP&R and the mayor's office was out of their mind. It's like, how many money ballots measures are we going to have on the ballot? But when it was explained to me, and I gained an understanding that basically, if they weren't able to backfill this money quickly, that they wouldn't be able to hire folks. If we did a May levy, we wouldn't be able to hire folks for next summer. And so basically, pandemic or not, adaptation to COVID or not, next summer will look a lot like this summer without this levy.
That's really powerful. Well, we don't have any more questions. I know everybody's going to be having a fabulous house party. I'd love to see your pictures of your house parties and do some dance moves while you're at it.
Yep.
I think it's really great for us to practice small, continuous acts of collective organizing. We have one more question from Heather. And Heather wants to know, can you speak more about innovation with the levy? And that'll be the last question that we take.
Well, that's a big question. You know, I mean, I think that, you know, there's going to be a community process to help determine how this money should be spent. And there will be an oversight committee. We'll have a new commissioner who I think, you know, well, actually, I shouldn't say what I think about that yet, because it's still speculative of who that might be. But I think there's, you know, with a new council, there's going to be the potential for a lot of innovation. As Adina will tell you, I'm always pushing, our board is always pushing for innovation. So there's nothing built, you know, baked into the levy at this point. But, you know, to get some breathing room from having to just constantly, you know, figure out what little bit we can cut here or what dollar can be stretched, you know, there's opens up the possibility of innovation. You know, whereas I think that a lot of, I've sat on the budget advisory committee for 5 or 6 years, I can't remember how long, and it, you know, it's all every year. It's really a, you know, it's a poverty discussion. It's not necessarily a, you know, let's think widely about what we're going to do. So we probably better move on from there.
Yeah.
Happy, feel free to email me. I'll put it in the chat box if you have other questions. And throw a house party, but endorse this.
Yeah, Randy, and to connect back to what Dr. AMC was saying early this morning, financial safety is a form of psychological safety for people, as well as the people within those systems and the systems themselves. And that's something that we want to steadily create, especially for our most important resources. And I'm excited that we will be going into our breakout session soon, but not before we have another performance. We will be with May Anna from Friends of Noise, an artist from Friends of Noise. And they are thrilled, and so are we, to present May Anna. She's a senior at Grant High School and loves to make music. She also loves performing with and for other people, which is not particularly easy to do right now. But she's thrilled about online opportunities that Friends of Noise arranges for her and other artists. May, welcome to the stage.
Hello, everyone. There's so many people here. Yeah, so I'm with Friends of Noise. Thank you so much to Andre. I don't think he's here, but I always want to thank him for having his organization and this opportunity. This song is called Almost. It's about 2 kids stargazing. So. We sat staring at the stars one night, but instead of the sky, I was trying to see through your eyes. Oh, your eyes. Your heartbeat slamming as I sit to the right. In a moment of truth, I poured my heart out in front of your eyes. Bluest eyes. And I would walk around the world, and then maybe, just maybe, you look me in the eyes. told you I love you and I saw as you smiled at me, it was alright. And the lights, you were standing looking out in the night. When I came back around, I just knew I was fine. You had that look in your eyes, filled with light. I would walk around the world and then maybe, just maybe, you look me in the eyes. I would walk around the world for you, baby. Will you look me in the eyes? I'd sit back and watch the stars with you, baby. Then maybe we'd look up and see the lights, cold night, and then suddenly all we can see is light, the northern light. Then you looked me in the eyes. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. That was amazing.
Beautiful.
Excellent. Yeah, music is so good for the spirit all the time, and especially during these times. I'm excited for us to move into what's next, and those are our breakout sessions. So you'll be getting some really specific information about topics that interest you the most right now as you move into your next chapter as a friend and ally of the parks. If you have any issues, well, let me take a step back. You will automatically/automagically be placed into the group of your selection. If you have any issues, then just use the link that you first used to get back in, and then someone in the main room will get you to where you need to go. And we will all come back in about an hour and a half to review, like understand what was unearthed in each of these sessions, and then we will close it out. So with that, let's go into our breakout rooms.